Okay, let's talk about tarot, right? Let's talk about tarot as a spiritual tool. Because I'm a frequent tarot, oracle, card reader. You know, I really enjoy the tool. I enjoy a lot of those like divination practices that come out of traditions of witchcraft and all of that fun stuff. I really think that they're very valuable as tools spiritually. And I want to talk about the way that I experience them and the way that I use them for my own spiritual development that's maybe a little different than what you'll typically see in the spiritual community. So the basis of belief for using tarot cards or another sort of divination tool is in the ability to discern information, right, that maybe exists in the past, the present, or the future. You know, truly, it's just uncovering information via the tool, via means where you would not otherwise be able to ascertain that information, right? And clairvoyance is to do this without those tools, right? That it's the idea of just being able to receive that information in sort of a divine, mystical, direct sense, just to kind of set the basis for what these definitions are and what they mean in the spiritual community. Now, to pivot a little bit, I'm gonna touch on quantum entanglement, and I know we're getting crazy with the trigger words here, and I'm by no means a quantum physicist, and take everything that I say with a grain of salt, right? But it is very well established at this point, you know, that things experience entanglement with one another, and that things behave in ways that defy logic sometimes on this sort of cosmic scale, right? Simply out of will, simply out of desire, right? Simply out of observation as well. And with that, I think that we can come to understand a nuance towards what divination tools are, how they work, you know, how manifestation works as an extension of engaging with this sort of, I don't want to say manipulation, but co-authorship of probability, I think is a better way to frame and to understand what is happening, because manipulation indicates that you're the only factor, the only thing in charge of what's going on here, you know. And I think that might be a little grandiose, particularly if you're at the beginning of your spiritual journey, your manifesting journey, your divination tools journey, right? Give me a second to gather my thoughts again. Anyway, I think the point I'm trying to get to is that there's a lot of ways to explain how and why this information is received when we use the focal points of these divination tools, right? There's a lot of information that the human body receives that we aren't necessarily always cognitively aware of, you know, pheromones in our environments among other people, you know, social cues, environmental cues, cues from nature that a lot of us have forgotten how to understand, you know. It's the trope, right, of the city person who doesn't understand what it means when the forest goes quiet. And someone who's grown up in the wilderness understands that if all the birds go quiet, it's probably because there's a large cat around or something, you know? Like, it's very, there's so much intuition occurring that you're not always processing, and there's realms of intuition beyond what we even know how to explain that are still very valid ways that we are receiving information, particularly energetically. And I can talk more about, like, my personal education, self-led education around quantum physics and around how I believe spirituality exists and interacts with material reality in the world. But that's not the point of this video. The point of this video is to talk about the divination tools. Now, specifically when I talk about tarot decks or oracle decks, which are one of our most common divination tools to reach for within spiritual communities, you know, coming from this age-old tradition of witchcraft, is because, sorry, I forgot where I started the beginning of that sentence, and I want to make sure it's making logical sense. When I'm talking about tarot, what I'm talking about is storytelling. You know, what I really think that has as, just a second. Okay, when I read tarot for myself, The point of engaging with the sequence of card is to create a story, right? To receive a story. Understanding, to me, what's why am I suddenly having such a hard time talking? Like, genuinely. Someone call the throat chakra police because I'm being blocked. Okay, here we go. Tarot, as a divination tool, gives you a story. What it does is give you a story about something, and you are using the symbolism put into those oracle cards or tarot cards to understand and to frame that story. You as the interpreter are just as important to co-authoring the story as whatever information is being received, right? And that is what is so vital to understand, I think, about engaging in these tools, is how much of receiving that story is about what are we doing about the story, how are we perceiving it as external to ourselves and reactive, something we should be reactive towards, versus how much of that is the story within us, how much of that is a mirror, how much of that is supposed to be for a self-reflection of, okay, these are the narratives that I am looking at, these are the narratives that I'm surrounding myself with, in archetypes of other people in my life, in archetypes of my own functions in life, in archetypes of viewing myself and actions I think I'm in, and where I think I'm at in my story, right? Because we're all constantly sort of going through the hero's cycle, right? We all experience new challenges, and we all have to come up with new ways to work through different obstacles, and our goals constantly change and evolve with us as we achieve the old things, as we become the target selves we wanted to become. And then, we continue to have more aspiration, more desire as humans trying to experience life, right? And experience life to its fullest. So as those things shift, I love to use tarot as almost I was about to say diagnostic, but that's a little cold. Almost a reflective pool, a reflecting mirror, and really kind of see where I think I am, who I think is around me, how I'm interpreting stories, and maybe how I wish I was interpreting them instead, maybe pulling a story about, something with a lot of Five of Swords in it, or, like something where there's some conflict, something where there's other people involved in archetype cards, and seeing, am I seeing this as a conflict I want to avoid? Am I seeing this as a conflict I want to engage in? Am I seeing this as a conflict that I'm winning? Am I seeing this as a conflict I'm even involved in, right? What do I think is important about the story I'm receiving? And what do I want to do about it? And do I want to change that reaction? Do I want to re-examine and say to myself, actually, like, I don't necessarily feel the need to address this in my life anymore. This is no longer an important feature for me to be involved in this type of conflict, and I would rather embody something different than what I'm embodying right now, and not necessarily, being kind of in the co-authorship of your own advice. I think that one of the hardest things to watch in the spiritual community is people kind of taking advice so externally from themselves without that internal reflection as well. And that is what tarot readers mean when they say use your discernment. That is what they mean when they say, is this resonating with you? You need to check, because they cannot be the end all be all for the authority on your stories and on your interpretations and on your desires as well. Does this resonate as something that's happening? Maybe. Does it also resonate with what you want to co-author in your life? That is the questions that you need to be asking, and that is why I encourage everyone to develop a relationship with the tools that allow that reflection. If you are drawn towards tarot and oracle cards as that spiritual tool, you know, absolutely engage with that. And if you don't have the expertise yourself, or you don't have access to cards, you know, engaging in other people's ability to storytell and ability to understand is a beautiful and fun thing to do as well. You know, and there's no harm in allowing yourself to listen to the stories other people are hearing and other people are telling, and using those to kind of reflect on your own stories, your own narratives in life, you know. But truly, you have to understand you are part of the storytelling. Your interpretation, your framing is part of the storytelling. You are also the storyteller. And it's crucial when you're engaging in divination tools to have that reflection, to have that understanding of your own authority in the situation. Because foregoing that authority out of a feeling of inadequacy, or a feeling of, you know, any types of fears that could surround that, will ultimately lead to a disempowerment for yourself, and lead to slower progression, right? If you're wanting to actually resolve situations in your life, actually resolve patterns in your life, you need to be able to understand exactly where your accountability lies. You know, you can't keep telling yourself that you are not the architect of your fate and continue to insist that you're able to manifest things. You gotta pick one. You gotta pick one. You're either at the mercy of the universe and the stories everyone else is giving you, or you are powerful enough to be part of the authorship of those stories, you know, powerful enough to engage in and make forward movement in your life, right? And I truly believe that everyone is an architect of their own fate, and foregoing admitting that, and foregoing claiming that, you know, is such a disservice to yourself and to everybody else around you who you're relying on, you know, for that authority, and also who could benefit from you and your power and your desires coming to fruition in the world. In this, I really just kind of want to demystify, right, tarot and oracle cards and other divination tools in that sense. Take away some of the mysticism that makes them feel inaccessible, because this is truly a way to engage in your own psychology, in your own intuition, in your own discernment. It's a gym, right, for you spiritually, intellectually, emotionally, to exercise your ability to engage with your thoughts, to engage with your emotions, to engage with your discernment, and how you choose to act on that, how you choose to build wisdom or not when given the opportunity. And I think so much of what my goal is in general with this page is to give you more authority spiritually. That's all of my videos are going to be. You know, we're decoding manifestation, we're demystifying tarot, we're bringing you the ability to understand and access your own spiritual power, your own spiritual development, so that you can be at the forefront of it. That is what you deserve, and that's what all of us deserve from you as well. You know, it's truly my life mission to give everyone a sense of autonomy in their own spiritual world. And I will actually be specifically talking more about that and self-sovereignty and that mission, and that the importance that has to me, and the stories behind what that created for me on my Patreon. It's also on a Kajove over on the Patreon. So if you want to talk more with me and hear more of my thoughts about self-sovereignty specifically as a concept, and spiritual autonomy and the importance of that, you can absolutely find me on the Patreon. Here on YouTube, you know, we'll talk about the spirituality. Over on TikTok, also on a Kajove, I talk a lot more about the trans experience, and you get a little more personal sound bites and creative moments from me as I navigate this in the day-to-day life. But I love you guys, and I appreciate you being around for another video, and I'll see you next time.